Donald Trump, back in the most powerful seat in the world, had made a decision. It was a decision that could alter the course of history, one that carried immense weight and consequence. He picked up the phone and dialed, his fingers moving with a sense of purpose and urgency. This was not a call to be taken lightly. On the other end of the line was Ferdinand Marcos Jr., President of the Philippines. Trump didn't mince words. His tone was direct, almost commanding. "Bong bong," he boomed. "It's time to send those Chinese ships a message." His voice carried a sense of urgency and determination that was impossible to ignore. "We need to show them we mean business." Marcos was taken aback. The gravity of Trump's words hit him like a tidal wave. He knew Trump was unpredictable, but this was on another level. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the potential fallout was unimaginable. Trump, in no uncertain terms, was ordering him to attack Chinese vessels in the West Philippine Sea. The implications were staggering. A military confrontation with China was unthinkable for a nation like the Philippines. A military confrontation with China was unthinkable for a nation like the Philippines. The potential for escalation was enormous, and the risks were almost too great to contemplate. The conversation was short, tense, and ended with a chilling ultimatum. Trump, ever the showman, wanted action, and he wanted it now. Trump, ever the showman, wanted action, and he wanted it now. He demanded a show of force, a demonstration of strength against what he perceived as Chinese aggression. He demanded a show of force, a demonstration of strength against what he perceived as Chinese aggression. The message was clear. The United States would not back down. Marcos put down the phone. His mind was racing, trying to process the enormity of what had just transpired. He was now facing the biggest crisis of his presidency. The weight of his nation, and potentially the world, rested on his shoulders. The decisions he made in the coming days would have far-reaching consequences. The weight of his nation, and potentially the world, rested on his shoulders. He knew that every move he made would be scrutinized, every decision analyzed. The pressure was immense, and the stakes could not be higher. The Philippine military was stunned. An order to directly engage Chinese vessels was unheard of. They were equipped for territorial defense, for skirmishes, not a full-blown naval confrontation with a superpower. The order sent shockwaves through the armed forces of the Philippines. Frantic calls were made, generals huddled with admirals. Contingency plans, long dormant, were dusted off and reviewed. The situation was a strategic nightmare. The Philippine Navy, despite modernization efforts, was dwarfed by the sheer size and might of the Chinese fleet. Their best bet was to scramble their limited air and naval assets, hoping to make a stand against an overwhelming force. The situation was incredibly delicate. Open defiance of a direct order from the United States, their longtime ally, was politically impossible, yet engaging in a suicidal conflict with China was equally unthinkable. News of Trump's order spread like wildfire. Global news channels went into overdrive. Social media exploded. The world watched with bated breath, waiting to see how China would respond. Beijing predictably reacted with fury. Statements poured out condemning the reckless provocation and warning of severe consequences. The Chinese military went on high alert. Naval units in the South China Sea were immediately put into a state of readiness. Fighter jets were scrambled, patrolling the skies near Philippine waters. The message was clear. Any attack on Chinese vessels would be met with swift and decisive retaliation. The international community was thrown into chaos. Governments around the world urged restraint, fearing a regional conflict spiraling out of control. Emergency meetings were convened at the United Nations. The world held its breath. In the face of mounting tensions and the looming threat of conflict, military strategists in Manila were tasked with an almost impossible mission. They had to prepare for scenarios that seemed unthinkable, yet were becoming increasingly likely. Time was of the essence. Every second counted as they meticulously planned and recalibrated their strategies. The clock was ticking and the pressure was immense. Military planners in Manila worked feverishly. They pored over maps, analyzed intelligence reports, and debated the best courses of action. Their dedication was unwavering, knowing the stakes were incredibly high. They knew that any strike, even a limited one, would be met with overwhelming Chinese force. The Chinese military's capabilities were vast and formidable, a stark contrast to the more modest resources of the Philippines. The Philippines' strategy hinged on maximizing their limited capabilities. They had to be smart, resourceful, and innovative. Every soldier, every piece of equipment had to be used to its fullest potential. Their objective would not be to win a war against China, an impossible task. Instead, they aimed to create enough disruption and damage to make the conflict too costly for China to continue. Instead, it would be to inflict enough damage through precise and calculated strikes to make the political cost for China high enough to force a de-escalation. The goal was to leverage the international community, to bring diplomatic pressure to bear on China, making the political ramifications of continued aggression untenable. Key military installations were put on high alert. Soldiers were briefed and ready, their training and discipline put to the ultimate test. Air bases were reinforced, with fighter jets armed and ready for deployment. Pilots were on standby, prepared to take to the skies at a moment's notice. Naval vessels, despite their limitations, were strategically positioned, prepared to make a desperate stand. The Navy's role was crucial, providing a first line of defense and a platform for offensive operations. The focus was on asymmetrical warfare, utilizing mobile hit-and-run tactics to try and exploit any vulnerabilities in the Chinese fleet. These tactics were designed to be unpredictable and disruptive. It was a high-risk gamble, a desperate throw of the dice. The planners knew the odds were against them, but they also knew that in the face of overwhelming force, their only chance was to be bold and daring. The fate of their nation depended on their ability to outthink and outmaneuver a vastly superior adversary. The international community was divided. The Indo-Pacific region had become a focal point of global tension, with nations grappling over how to respond to the escalating situation. Traditional US allies in the region, like Japan and Australia, found themselves in an incredibly difficult position. They were caught between their long-standing alliance with the United States and the need to maintain regional stability. While they shared concerns about China's growing assertiveness in the region, outright military action was a step too far. The potential for conflict loomed large and the stakes were incredibly high. Publicly, they expressed support for the Philippines' right to defend its territory, but stopped short of endorsing Trump's aggressive stance. Their statements were carefully crafted to avoid escalating tensions further. Behind closed doors, diplomatic channels were buzzing. High-level discussions were taking place, with diplomats working tirelessly to find a peaceful resolution. Frantic calls were made between Washington, Tokyo, Canberra, and other capitals. Leaders were in constant communication, trying to navigate the complex web of alliances and interests. The consensus was clear. Trump had overstepped. His aggressive actions were seen as a destabilizing force, threatening the delicate balance of power in the region. His actions threatened to destabilize the entire region. The military buildup was unprecedented, and the risk of conflict was higher than ever. Some countries, however, saw an opportunity. They began to assess how they could leverage the situation to their advantage. Vietnam, with its own territorial disputes with China in the South China Sea, quietly offered its support to the Philippines. This move was strategic, aimed at strengthening their position against China. The situation was a powder keg, and the fuse had been lit. The world watched with bated breath, hoping for a resolution but fearing the worst. The Indo-Pacific had become a theater of geopolitical tension, with the potential for conflict hanging in the balance. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. was caught in a geopolitical maelstrom. Defying Trump's order would severely damage the Philippines' relationship with the United States, their longtime protector. Complying, however, would mean risking a devastating war with China, a conflict they could not win. It was a no-win situation. Marcos knew that the Philippines, despite its strategic importance, was just a pawn in a much larger game. A game being played by superpowers with little regard for the consequences. He also understood the sentiment of his people. They were tired of Chinese incursions into their waters, tired of being bullied by a regional giant. But were they ready for war? Were they willing to risk everything for a conflict they did not start? The situation in the West Philippine Sea was on a knife edge. The world held its breath, waiting to see if cooler heads would prevail or if the region would be plunged into chaos. The stakes could not have been higher. Trump's reckless gamble had thrown the region into turmoil, jeopardizing decades of relative peace and stability. The Philippines, once a bystander in the great power rivalry between the United States and China, was now at the epicenter of a potential global conflict. The outcome of this crisis, whatever it may be, would have profound and long-lasting consequences for the Philippines, for the region, and for the world. The world watched and waited and prayed for peace.